We're live. Hello, everybody. Okay, I can see that it's just the two of us on the small screen, but very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us from Singapore, Southeast Asia, and all around the world. We have a very special edition of one of the fireside chats on our Asia PE VC Summit here with DealStreetAsia. And I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Paul Santos, who is the managing partner of Wavemaker Partners. Welcome, Paul, to the session.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just to kind of give some of our viewers here a bit of a sense of, Wavemaker, some of them may not know who you are. If you could just kind of kindly introduce, Wavemaker Partners and some of the amazing work that you guys have done actually in this region.
Yeah, thanks. I have a presentation, so maybe we just, I guess, dive in.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're basically early stage VCs. So primarily in B2B and deep tech. So we've made 136 investments since 2012, and 85% of them are in B2B and deep tech. That's about 116 companies. I don't know if anybody else has done 116 B2B and deep tech companies. So our first fund was about 6.5 mil, and second fund was 66.5, and our third fund is 111. So about 180 million in AUM, focused again on the space. So we've had 12 exits since we've started. The enterprise value of these exits are about 600 mil. So, early days, but at least it's promising. And so, why do we like deep tech? It's about 1/3 of our portfolio is deep tech. And this is a definition, and needed somebody credible enough to come up with it. But bottom line is there science in it, right? Is there unique science in it? It's not just a business model innovation broadly, right? And yeah, so these are the common areas that people talk about, when they talk about deep tech. These are the areas that deep tech can be applied. And yeah, so what's Peter Thiel's favorite question, right? So this is what we believe. We believe that deep tech and B2B and deep tech represent a tremendous yet undervalued opportunity here in Southeast Asia. And if you go here, it's, there are many things you need to build a company, so that's, we won't go through all of them. But basically, there's a market opportunity, there's talent, and there's capital, right? And again, we'll talk about this because some people don't believe it's there. Mm-hmm. But it's a big enough economy, right? Like I think people will say this over and over again. And one of the criticisms is I haven't seen really big companies come out of Southeast Asia yet, especially in the B2B and deep tech space. And why can it happen? And so that for me is kind of like driving with a rear view mirror, right? So you either believe this place is fertile ground or you don't. And so we think it is because it's a big enough market. And there are really impressive research institutes over here, right? So on the left, you see all of these universities that have cooperated with the Singapore government to set up different kinds of research labs here. And on the right, that's under A-Star. You can see all of the good work that's being put into many of these areas. And then, you have corporates over here, right? You have guys who sort of set up the regional headquarters, but also innovation centers. So real decisions are made here and decisions around innovation. And again, I'm not gonna go too deeply, but if you put all of these things together, if you think about what's one of the biggest risk factors deep tech companies need to overcome, it's winning their first marquee customer. And the combination of all of these things that I shared with you make the region, starting with Singapore, a really interesting place to get that 0 to 1 moment. And so I'll pause here for a bit because I know we'll have.
Yeah, I mean, you were just going through some of the slides in the beginning. The first question that I had initially, as you were kind of zooming through the slides, was, does the Wavemaker actually have a specific definition? I know you did kind of, jump across those slides a little bit, but maybe if you could just kind of take me through in terms of, Wavemaker's own definition of deep tech. I think everybody kind of defines deep tech in different ways. But what is Wavemaker's understanding and definition of deep tech?
Right. And so let me again keep it very simple. I try to keep things even simple for ourselves. Is again, when we talk, is there real science behind it? Is it something that's not just a business model innovation? Is it something that is going to be difficult to do, difficult to replicate, but solves the problem in a meaningful way? Now, is it tech or deep tech or kind of deep tech?
Yeah.
In some sense, it also almost doesn't matter, right? Like medium deep tech versus deep tech. Perhaps a way to think about the kinds of projects that we would get interested in is maybe there's a difference between different kinds of projects based on the path to commercialization. So there are things that we might call science projects that are going to take years, and the path to commercialization is going to be so difficult. And again, just knowing ourselves and knowing the region and knowing the capital and the risk appetite around here, maybe we do less science projects. So maybe we will find technology. It's still real science, it's real deep technology, but maybe the path to commercialization is shorter. Why? Because we only have so much capital here to get them started, but we also have so many opportunities anyway. So we don't have, so at least if you want to say in the Wavemaker world, that's what we try to focus on. We try to focus on still science or still real technology, but the path to commercialization shorter. Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, but I mean, how much has that actually changed? I mean, I know you've been an active investor in Asia for a long time. Like when you talk about science here in Asia, it's hard to compare, the ecosystem, the research community, the size of the talent pools here in this part of the world compared to places like Silicon Valley or even in Europe, where there are long-standing research institutions that have done this for long periods of time. I mean, has that changed over the years in terms of being able to build innovation that can really scale?
So let's answer that on many fronts, right? Because that's typical question about deep tech in Southeast Asia, right? So the first thing that I point out is nobody has a monopoly on innovation globally, right? It comes from everywhere, right? Like I saw an article on Estonia, right? They have 4 unicorns for a population of 1.3 million people, right? And in many ways, they have a lot of disadvantages, but they're still able to innovate, right? I'm not saying they're deep tech stuff, but I'm just saying, innovation can come from anywhere. The second is, just the world has shrunk with communications, with the internet, mobile, with travel so easy. People can be everywhere and innovate, right? And sort of connect. Right? So maybe a few years ago, it was harder to imagine investors from outside the region investing in Southeast Asia for something deep tech related. But now it's happening. And if we go to the region, there's also a little more interest in the region now, right? Like when I started in 8 years ago in 2012, people really didn't care about Southeast Asia, right? You go to China and people say, I have enough to do here. I don't care about Southeast Asia. But, if you look at just the capital that's pouring in, there is now interest here. I used to go to the US a lot, you mentioned Silicon Valley. I tell them about Singapore or Southeast Asia. Nobody cared. And now people care, right? And so all of these things are just building up, I guess, interest in the space, momentum in the space. And we talk about talent, right? Again, talent can move and things change with politics. Like, just think about immigrants, right? Like if you look at our portfolio, we have 32 nationalities. And just to give you an example, I have 3 deep tech companies, 3 PhDs from Iran, and they studied here, and they're building really compelling companies. So the whole concept of, there's no talent here. Again, that's an easy thing to throw out there, but who's to say that it doesn't exist here, right? The people study here, people work here. 90% of the Fortune 500 have offices here, right? So there's talent coming here. And the other thing I say about that is, name me one ecosystem in the world that says they have too much talent. Nobody says they have too much talent.
Yeah.
Right? So again, the way I think about it is there's a lot, again, this is why, what important truths do you believe that few people agree with you on, right? It's very easy to dismiss this part of the world. And I get it. But that's the reason I was showing all of the macros earlier was, but if you really dig deep, if you really look around, you might be surprised. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we have more than everybody else, but maybe we have enough. Maybe we have enough to create a few compelling companies. And then when we do, then people will give the region a little more credit. Until we do, we won't get that credit, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
You do have a few companies I think you wanted to share today. If you could just kind of bring up the slides to show, I mean, because one of the main criticisms among a lot of investors is, the lack of talent here in Asia. I'm sure, I mean, you've invested in so many deep tech startups and founders here in this part of the world. Maybe if you could just kind of take us through some of these examples. I mean, another criticism as well is, do you find that it's always the same investors chasing after the same small pool of talent? Because, then the question will be, yes, there's so much capital that's coming into the ecosystem, but is the talent pool growing together with the capital that's coming in? Is another question that I do have.
Yeah, no, it's all, again, all very fair questions, right? And so what I prepared is like 4 examples to hopefully answer that. And I'll add an answer already up front, which is, because the world is so global, I was talking about the ability to communicate, the ability to work remotely. We find that a lot of our teams could have talent from different parts of the world working on their projects too. Right? But let's go through some examples, right? So HydroLeap is wastewater treatment, right? It's a big enough problem, right? Not just in Southeast Asia, but globally. And typically the way you treat wastewater is with chemicals, which is kind of like fighting fire with fire. And so Mo is one of those Iranian PhDs that I was talking about. He's studying in NUS, and a lot of his work was around using electricity to clean water, right? So no more chemicals. And it's been a proven process, but the electrodes would corrode over time. And so you would end up using more power, or the efficacy wouldn't be as good. And so chemicals were still cheaper. And so what he set out to do was, to do something purely electrical. And that's what he did. Now, what's really interesting about why Singapore is a great place to do something like this, aside from doing the research in NUS, he joins Entrepreneur First, which is here. They get him on that program. And the Singapore government is absolutely committed to wastewater treatment. And so he found a beachhead market in a construction site. And it was a construction site for Facebook. And you would imagine that a customer like Facebook wants to be, promoting ESG, right? Wanting to do right by the environment. And so, because also they're in Singapore, the customers took a chance on them. And they were proving that the technology works, right? And starting with the construction industry, he started to attract other industries to make use of the technology. Again, this is very early days, right? But results will speak for themselves. Like if I can do it, I can clean water for you at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the space, without using chemicals. It's a compelling value proposition. And the moment we have enough of these proof points across multiple industries, you could imagine why this thing could be taken around the world, right? And he's smart enough. I don't know if you noticed, maybe I'll go back a slide. He's putting his treatment facility inside containers that can easily be shipped. And so there's already this ambition to go outside that he's sort of preparing for. The second one is in cybersecurity. It's a company called Borneo. Different kind of talent, right? So Prithvi, was head of global data security for Yahoo, then Facebook, then Uber, right? So really hyper growth companies, right? And a lot of people think about customer data or data privacy. When you think about that, you think about building your impregnable fortress, or you think about having your elite ninja guards. If they come in, you're going to kill the intruder, etc. But the reality is, a lot of this data, or if you think about data gold that you're trying to protect, in today's business world, everything is partnerships. You actually share that data with your partners. And you ask yourself, okay, what happens to that data when I send it out? Do I know? Not really, right? And within Facebook and Uber especially, those are hyper growth companies. The kind of scale of data they created, the kind of partnerships they formed, you can imagine what kind of headache this guy had, right? And he's here in Singapore. And he could have built his company in Silicon Valley, but he chose to stay here. And he's competing against guys in Silicon Valley. He knows what they're doing, but what he's doing that's genius is he's automating a lot of these things. He's basically taking from what he's learned. You were gonna ask something?
Yeah, I was about to ask, you did bring up about his choice to situate here in Singapore. Do you see more and more of such founders actually choosing to actually base themselves out of Singapore over a place like Silicon Valley? And how is that change? Is that accelerating?
Again, when you have a low base, it's easy to accelerate, right? So yeah. I can't give you a rate, but I'm just saying, could you have found somebody like him 12 years ago or 8 years ago? Maybe not. But he's here right now, right? And what's even more exciting is he was telling me how, we raised a modest amount of money, about $2.5 million. And he's built the product already. And the product is good enough to win customers, not just in the region, but even in the US. And the kinds of companies that he targets are these fast growth technology companies because he knows their pain points. That's what Facebook and Uber were like, right? Yeah. But let's just say the kinds of customers he's winning, the contract sizes are huge. And the valuations on these companies are north of 10 billion and up. And he's able to win them over from here during COVID. And he told me he couldn't have built this with the budget he had in Silicon Valley. And he still has a lot of runway, right? And again, so yes, there are people that we've experienced choosing to take the world on from here, if you will. Now, will he have to re-domicile at some point? Who knows, right? But to start them off here, that's what he's done. This one came out of collaborative research between Singapore and MIT, right? So Kwan, who's working here in Singapore, Roger is the sort of the scientist in MIT, and we just hired a CEO, Jim, who's a biotech veteran, but he's based in Boston. And so what I was trying to show with this example is, you can have collaboration that's truly global. And what they basically have done, and this is just a fancy slide, but basically they create these chips. So imagine today to qualify any drug, you need animal testing and all of the like, well, what if you could put human organs on a chip, human systems on a chip, right? Could you improve drug discovery? Could you make that more efficient? Could you increase the chances of success? If you take this out further, could you do personalized medicine where I can take, your cells and put it on a chip and test how they would react to medicine, right? And so, this is just a fancy chart showing, what are the things you can put on the chip and what you can do with it. But they're starting with research institutes globally, right? I think I can name, places like Harvard or Yale use some of their chips already for research. There are countless publications around the validity of their science. So this one is, it was built here in Singapore, and we came in recently with Enterprise Singapore to invest in it, and now to see if we can move beyond research labs now, going into hopefully the pharma world, etc. But made in Singapore. Right? And the last example is a laser communications company, right? And founders studied here. One guy in NUS, one guy in NTU. And they grew up. One grew up in India, one grew up in Iran. So Dinesh is my second Iranian PhD. And internet connectivity, the challenge of it was very real for them, right? When they came to Singapore, it was the first time they really had a chance to see high speed, was what they would say. And so they wanted to democratize it. And the way to do it is because today you lay fiber, and that's expensive. And that's why many emerging markets don't have connectivity that we have. Well, what if you don't need to dig? What if you don't need fiber? What if laser, you could use the last mile and eventually the backbone using this wireless fiber optics technology, right? And data consumption is going to grow. With 5G, it's going to grow even faster. And if you're using microwave, it's going to get saturated. It's going to get jammed. But when you use laser, it's just light. And the genius that they have is basically even through weather conditions, even through some shake, so they come in pairs, right? And they lock the signal in. They've proven that they can keep the signal up through a typhoon. And you can see so much of the world still isn't connected yet. And they went through many POCs, and they would pass with flying colors, right? And they recently raised 10 million. There's going to be a couple million more coming that hasn't been announced. But when we invested in this thing, we knew they weren't going to have a lot of commercial traction by the time our money ran out. But their technology could be at a point where you could really see it could work, right? And who would have expected that a deep tech company raising $10-12 million Series A from global investors? So Airbus Ventures, which invests a lot in things related to space. So the dream of these guys is a global telecom company, a satellite network using lasers, right? Like, so let them dream, right? But you have guys like them, and we have experts at EDBI who look into the technology and say, this thing could actually work. And again, you wouldn't have expected to find this in Singapore. The guys at SK Telecom that tested it through that typhoon that I mentioned you earlier, I met the guy in charge of that innovation experiment, and I was telling him, did you expect to find stuff like this in Singapore? He goes, no. I said, come back, because we have more. Right? But these are just 4 examples, right?
Yeah.
And all we're saying is there are opportunities here. And when you have opportunities, people will try to solve problems. I gave you an array of problems that are meaningful and important to solve, right? And the question of talent, I've given you credentials of people who've done it, but proof will be in the pudding. And the fact that they're getting somewhere means, they could be right. Now, capital, there's enough, with guys like us to get it started.
Yeah.
We're hoping to find more. We're hoping to find the next kind of capital for the growth side, but that's fine. the way we're coping with it is we're making friends with investors globally. And what I tell our investor friends globally is, feel free to be an arbiter of quality, right? Test what we have against what you see in the world, and see if we can fight, right? So I'm not coming out here saying, we're better than everybody else, but I'd also want us to open our eyes and say, you know what, we actually have a chance.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to continue the conversation, but
In terms of capital, I mean, we talk so much about, Asia drawing so much capital from all around the world, especially in the last year or so. You've seen like record dry powder, entering the region. How much of it of a concern is it or not for you, in terms of whether or not this capital is actually flowing into deep tech? Simply because, everyone is chasing the business model innovations, as you say. Everyone's chasing the Grabs and the Gojeks. In fact, they are the ones that are actually raising, every time we do our reports, they're the ones that make up the most in terms of fundraising amounts every year. Is that a concern to you that not enough capital is actually flowing into some of these niche segments?
Well, if I'll be honest, that's been my concern the last 8 years.
Still, it's still the concern.
It's always, again, we like to have this equation we talk about all the time: opportunity equals value less perception, right? And so again, we will say that the perceived value that you can build really interesting B2B and deep tech companies out of this part of the world is still low. Where we have hope is that maybe the actual value of these companies could be really high. And by investing while the perception is low, hopefully the companies show enough progress, enough traction, that we will be able to convince investors, right? So yes, so there will be certain things that will attract more investors because it's easier to understand, because it's more obvious. But when something is more obvious, then maybe the market prices it more competitively. Maybe, to your point, there will be fewer deals or many people chasing the same deals. And so then the price becomes more difficult. And so that's the risk reward question that investors have to answer for themselves. And so what we need to do is show people, look, this is the opportunity equals value less perception gap, right? This is the risk reward gap.
Yeah.
And if you can make a compelling investment case, there should be enough to fund you. And again, we mitigate that by going global, right? We mitigate that by finding investors even outside the region, and hopefully we can pleasantly surprise them too.
So the question really then is about the risk then. I mean, how do you think a first time? I mean, I'm sure there are some in the audience, who may be contemplating, they may have seen a number of deep tech startups that they, had the opportunity to be invited, to do a small round, an angel investment in. How do you think they should approach? How do you think first time investors should approach deep tech, incorporating deep tech into their portfolio?
Right, that's a good question. So my belief with angel investing, you come in very early, right? Risk is super high, but hopefully you come in enough that, just like VCs, it will be a power law. There will be a few companies that could really go, right? And so one of the starting points is venture or angel investing in general. I encourage people to is build a portfolio, right? Nobody's that good that they can just pick 5. Well, maybe some people are, but it's very, very difficult. Right? But if you imagine building a portfolio, and you can imagine a longer horizon, if you want to go 5 years, 10 years, but have 50 companies is what I would say over a period of time. So commit to a space. So let's just say you want to commit $1 million into angel investments over the next 10 years, then divide that by 50. Maybe your angel check sizes are maybe 20K, right? And then build a diversified portfolio. Generally, right? And you might be doing yourself a disservice if you did it all the same kind. Again, I use the word might because some people are smart at what they do, and they can be picking well. If you may want to include some B2B and deep tech stuff in your portfolio. Now, The other advice, again, that's typical for angels is like, go with a group, don't go by yourself, right? If you're going to write 20K, you can't do it all by yourself anyway. But suss out the founding team and find people like you. And so there are many angel groups that you can join and do that. Now, what some other people do for instant diversification is part of that capital that they want to do, they put into a fund. You know, it could be an accelerator fund or an early stage fund, whatever, right? Different kinds of funds that will cover the space, and then use the funds as sort of filter and maybe invest beside them, you know, but be helpful, right? So there's a lot of these practical stuff that you can do, and ultimately, whatever kind of tech investment you make, regardless of how smart you think you are, you really don't know anyway. Right, at the angel. And so that's why you have a larger portfolio, make sure you diversify so it's not all of one kind and not all of one geography, and see what you can do.
I think last question before we wrap up. We are actually almost to the end of the session already. So just a last question on so keeping in line with this, right? Like most deep tech investments actually tend to be a lot more capital intensive. You also have to be a lot more patient because, you know, unlike apps where, you know, a lot of other types of business models allow you to monetize a lot more quickly compared to deep tech. How should a first-time investor kind of approach capital deployment into deep tech and time to market as well as exits, which, you know, are far longer to turn around compared to other types of businesses?
Okay, so here's how I frame that. It's a good question. My belief is all early stage investing requires patient capital. You just have to choose what you want to be patient with. Let me explain. There are mainly consumer type investments where people get excited because the number of signups go up or downloads or GMV goes up, right? So that's what you get excited about. What do you need to be patient with? Well, typically, the unit economics aren't so good to start, right? And so you will have to be patient with negative unit economics. And then typically, if you're fast growth, negative unit economics times fast growth means high absolute burn, right? So if you can stomach bad unit economics, sort of high absolute burn, to get to the market leader, then maybe, yeah, you can do that. Now, with the deep tech stuff and the B2B stuff, what do you need to be patient with? To your point, right? You need to be patient with, you have to take time to build the product because it has to be 10 times better, right? You have to take time to sell because there are so many stakeholders, right? But what's the reward? The reward typically is you have positive unit economics. Usually these things, when you sell them, the margins are high, right? Especially if it's deep tech, because it's by nature, your science is unique, right? What you get is what I like to think is a more defensible business, right? Unlike consumer business, part of why the unit economics are so bad, aside from the customer acquisition costs, is the churn can be quite high too, because consumers can be quite fickle. The thing that makes it hard to sell to businesses are also what makes it attractive, because they stay longer. And then if you're able to enter these markets, you have a scalable, sustainable business model. If you look at the IPOs of 2019, the B2B and deep tech stuff did far better than the consumer stuff, right? Because of these things. So all I'm saying is, you pick what you want to be patient with, right? I'm not saying that one is perfect. I'm just saying they're different flavors. And so you just have to choose which flavor you like.
Cool. All right, we have come to the end of the session. We just barely make it. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see all of you again soon. Take care and be safe. Bye. Yay, it's done.